Shrimad Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 33. If you refuse to engage in this righteous war, then forfeiting your dharma and honor, you will incur sin, O Arjun. Question. Sir, namaste. I'm an Indian origin man living in the US. We have a civil war-like situation here over the murder of a black man by a cop almost a week back. Now many forces are trying to provoke all minority populations to stand up against this injustice. It is very easy for me to take a neutral stand and do nothing like most other Indians. But when I read the above verse, I feel like taking a stand and joining those who are protesting on streets and social media. So as you have several times emphasized fighting the right battle that liberates us, I want to know whether battles such as these which are fought on the social front are worth fighting for. How do I know which battles to choose in such cases? The matter is nuanced. We need to explore and understand. Yes, obviously, the killing of the colored man was barbaric, gruesome. No man, whatever race, color, ethnicity, gender, age, deserves that treatment and that kind of a death. There is no doubt about it. And it's a great thing in itself that people are coming out on the streets to protest against a system that perpetuates such atrocities. I shudder to think what kind of a society it would be in which even such actions would go unnoticed, even such deaths would go unsympathized. That would be a really horrible society and a really dead situation. Far better than that kind of a possible indifference is the current social action that we are witnessing on the streets in the US and even in some other countries of the world where there are protests. So it augurs well. People are not indifferent to each other's woes, and people's concerns cut across ethnicity, nationality, and many other divisions. So it's a heartening thing to see. At the same time, one must wonder about whether we intend to go the full distance when it comes to meeting and countering injustice. All the current protests are against injustice, and injustice in all its forms and versions is deplorable, is it not? It is wonderful that injustice of one kind means so much to us, hurts us badly, stirs us into action on the streets. But then, even as we engage in all the action, we need to take our activism to its rightful end. We cannot just be middling activists. We cannot say that our sympathies go only thus far and no more. If we indeed are sympathetic, as we must be, it's our responsibility, then we must extend our sympathies to the victims of all kinds of injustices everywhere. Else, we stand vulnerable to being accused of hypocrisy. Taking a position of righteousness is both a virtue, a responsibility, as well as a vulnerability. There are incidents that come very starkly and very loudly into the public domain, because those incidents are happening in a developed country, in a city, in front of a big shop, in full view of the commoners. And there are a dozen people who are recording the incidents on their mobile cameras. So it's all getting very public. It's all very in our faces. Not only are the visuals being recorded, the heart-rending cries of the dying man are also there in the video clips. We know precisely for how many minutes and how many seconds was the police officer pinning the man down with his knee on his neck. All these details are available, and these details make it impossible for us to ignore the event or act indifferent to the crime. We have been forced to act. We have been forced to act because the evidence is so very stark, undeniable. I would say this is an occasion to also think of events of an equal atrocity and equal severity, where the cries are not audible, the footages are not available because there is nobody to record, and where there is no mention in the media because the murder or the injustice or the atrocity is happening away from the public eye, probably in some underdeveloped or developing country, or probably in some corner of a developed country that nobody cares about. And there are several such corners cultivated deliberately by each society, including the societies in the developed world, where there is a lot of crime and bloodshed. Socially approved crime and socially approved bloodshed. In fact, those corners are meant for bloodshed. It's an unwritten law. All kinds of horrible things can keep happening in those corners, and we won't come to inquire. We don't bother, because what's happening in those corners pleases us in some way or fulfills some of our demands and needs. It's time to raise our voice against those silent yet shrieking atrocities as well. As some of the protesters have said, we all bleed red. Right? We all bleed red. Irrespective of our color, we all bleed red. That feeling needs to be extended. That feeling needs to be taken to its logical conclusion. One does not die only when one is actively killed by a police officer. One dies also when one is a victim of various kinds of systems. And several of those systems are patronized by exactly those forces and persons and groups that are protesting so vociferously against the unfortunate death of George Floyd. I would want this protest to gain depth. Such activism should embrace all injustices everywhere. And quite surprisingly, if such activism were to become so all-embracing, then it would require the protesters to introspect. We have people dying of disease, we have people dying of poverty. These are not natural reasons. We have a culture that promotes pleasure. And one man's pleasure is not only another man's death, but often his own death as well. And even the word death needs to be explored in its entirety. Does a man die only when his heart stops beating and brain stops functioning? Or are there more heinous and hidden and passive ways to kill a man? How about murders in which the murdered one continues to eat and live and breathe and walk for the next 40 years? When will we actively protest against such murders? And if we all do indeed bleed red, then how about the blood of animals? Is that green or blue or violet? And it's a horrible contrast that the same American society that is protesting so vehemently today is the biggest murderer of animals in the entire history of mankind. I want to remind the protesters, we all bleed red, including the animals. So yes, do rise and protest, but then do not let your protest be so limited. Do not let your protest be driven purely by dramatic emotionality. There are an unimaginable number of murders happening every second, everywhere. Let our consciousness expand to take notice of all of them. Let our sympathies extend to all conscious beings. Are you getting it? Otherwise, the danger is that protesting on a single cause, on a single event, against a single act of injustice can become an exercise in self-righteousness. The protesters can take the liberty of allowing themselves to feel on the right side of justice, on the right side of history, and on the right side of righteousness as well. The protesters license themselves to have moral authority when the fact is that they need to be introspecting and self-inquiring a lot more. Let this horrible incidence of the murder of the young man be a turning point. Let's protest against all injustices. Let's expand the very definition of justice. Else, as we said, we run the risk of appointing ourselves as moral guardians when the fact is that we are just as immoral as the ones we are protesting against. That threatening possibility needs to be guarded against. Are you getting it?